Welcome everyone to the Microsoft 365 Virtual Marathon. Thank you for attending and we hope you're having a great conference so far. I'd like to introduce the awesome Alexander Meijers as our next speaker. Alexander will be presenting a session titled Empower Your Workers Using Microsoft Guides. Alex, the stage is yours. Please take it away.
Thank you, Thomas. So yeah, I'm going to talk about Microsoft Guides with HoloLens. I have different titles, but it's the same content. So before I start, we have some slides from the conference. One is about that the SharePoint conference is now going to be the Microsoft 365 collaboration conference. It's be held next year between 23rd to 25th in March. We also want to thank the sponsors, of course. They are making this happen. And this is actually great. You can actually win a Oculus Quest. I have one at home, and it's one of the best VR devices to come into VR within a few minutes. So try this and try to win one. And last but not least is that the sponsors funds will go for 10% to support community relief, and it is possible to donate yourself. So if you can, please consider donating to the following charities relief funds. You can find them on every slide. So let's start with my session. Let's talk a little bit about who I am. So my name is Alexander Meijers. I'm an XR architect and evangelist, meaning I post a lot of stuff online, making some people happy on that point. I'm a Microsoft Windows development MVP, specifically for mixed reality. My background is actually a lot with SharePoint. I have been working with SharePoint from version 2001 till 2016. Moved to SharePoint Online, Office 365 and Azure. About 4 years ago, I came in contact with a HoloLens device. And after 2 weeks in the company, I said, can I take it home? Can I try it out? And from that day, I actually had the device, I think almost every day with me. The result was that I actually built on a proposition within the company for mixed reality. I started the mixed reality user group in the Netherlands. I've actually started the Global XR community, which is the host for Global XR Talks, which are monthly talks globally. We're doing a Global XR Bootcamp, and we're actually running a Global XR community zone in Old Space VR. So enough about me. So the agenda for today is I want to talk a little bit about training and guidance. Secondly, I want to talk about what is mixed reality and how you can, and what Microsoft HoloLens 2 incorporates in point of that. Third, I want to go into guides because Microsoft has a great solution for this. This is actually going to be really cool. And I'm going to explain a lot about how you can work with guides. So what is possible, what is not. I'm going to try a lot of demos. So you're going to see a lot of my living room. I have 4 children, so it will not be that clear and that nice and that neat, but yeah, keep that in mind. So if you talk about the business value, if you talk about immersive training or training at itself, there are a few things which are very important. You want to empower your first line workers, for example. You want to help them, to give them tools, new technology, to even make it better and easier to do training. But it can also be maximizing the effectiveness of your training. So measuring the performance of somebody executing the training and see if it can actually become better and better. So there are a lot of business values defined for companies to do training. And at the point, it always results in empower your workforce, deliver new services, so deliver new ways of how you can actually deliver a training. And it's actually all about reimagining your manufacturing way of thinking. And that will be more clear when I'm going to explain about guides. So before I'm going to start about guides, I think it's wise to talk about a little bit what is now actually mixed reality. And for people who don't know about Microsoft HoloLens 2, I think most of you know about HoloLens 1. I'm going to explain a little bit about Microsoft HoloLens 2. So let's first start about realities. So for me, the first reality you're going to talk about is about virtual reality. Virtual reality means for me that we are truly immersive in a digital world, meaning I do not have any knowledge about the actual world around me. Wearing a device like a virtual reality device will eventually take me off the actual world. If you talk about augmented reality, you're actually talking about enriching the actual world around us with digital information. So digital information can be video, holograms, or sound, or anything. But with augmented reality, it's always bound to the user, and it's like presented like an overlay. If you talk about mixed reality, you're actually talking about augmented reality plus, because it's also enriching the actual world around us. But the difference is that mixed reality devices are able to understand the world around them. So using an HoloLens actually can see floors, tables, walls, and can use it to bind objects to that. Now, nowadays, if you look at devices which are defined as augmented reality, like your phone, it actually becomes more and more mixed reality, but they stay with the name. So you can actually use augmented or mixed. It doesn't matter. It's all encapsulated on the XR. So talk about Microsoft HoloLens 2, the next step into the future. So Microsoft HoloLens 2 is a device, and I have one here with me, is a device just like HoloLens 1. It's just a Windows 10 computer, a simple one, with the difference if you compare it to your laptop, it has, instead of a 2D screen, it has a 3D screen, a 3D environment where I can put my applications in. So it's, as I already said, it's a mixed reality device, so it understands the world around it. It uses about 5 cameras to understand that world. The cameras can be seen here in front of it with 4 grayscale cameras, 1 depth camera. And it is, while you're actually wearing it and moving it around, it will actually scan the environment and understand where everything is. The third thing, which is really cool, is that it supports nowadays natural gestures. With HoloLens 1, you only had the tap gesture and the bloom gesture. That's actually almost gone. The tap gesture is still there for far gestures, but I'm now able to actually touch holograms and take them into my hand. And that can be, that's what we call near gestures, but it's also possible to reach out to a hologram far away by doing a far gesture. And then you actually point like a Spider-Man and line to that point. Another thing is, it also understands, for example, eye tracking. And the eye tracking, it has a number of advantages. One, it actually can define where you're looking at. But secondly, think about industry where HoloLens is mostly used as an enterprise device. An engineer can actually put on a device that can do an eye recognition and then automatically log on onto an AAD account for that user. And at that point of time, all applications run under that account. So that's a little bit about HoloLens 2. And I want to give a little small demo to show how that actually works. So let me try to see if that's going to work. So I'm going to put on the HoloLens. And we're gonna run the view. There'll be a little bit of latency, but it doesn't matter. And I think I have to turn off my sound. Sorry for that. So it actually allows me to do a lot of things. So let's say I do a 3D viewer, and what you see is what I'm actually pressing buttons. And this is funny because I almost never use a 3D viewer, so it was updating again. And I'm always fun. I can actually say, now let's say I want to do, and you actually see my using my hands. I will pick the astronaut, which is an interesting always one, and I will move that away. So what you now see is I have a hologram in front of me, and I'm actually able to touch it and to make it bigger or to actually rotate it. And I can actually play around with it and put it somewhere. But I can also use, as you now see, a far gesture, allowing me to put it somewhere in the room, and then do 2 gestures, if it will work. I can actually make it bigger, really big. The fun thing about this is that you can actually use your hands. You don't use almost a tap gestures anymore. It's actually doing everything by touching holograms. The only thing what you're missing is the haptic feedback. So let's close this one. if it will close. Always one. Yes, close. Thank you. So let's stop this one. So for mixed reality value proposition, because it's an enterprise product, there are three things which are important. One is improving skilling. So one thing you can do with guides is making training more efficient, which is also the second one, efficiency and quality gains. And it gives you the new tools for your first line workers. So let's go into guides. So Microsoft Dynamics 365 Guides, it's called Microsoft Dynamics 365 Guides because it's part of Dynamics, is an application which allows you to build training modules for your engineers, employees, or whatsoever. And the cool thing about it is that it allows you to create a training on a virtual device or on an actual asset, and then let an engineer actually take his goal and try to do the training itself. And you can use the results for that. So the product requirements you need Microsoft Office 365, you need an AAD account, of course. The one who is actually creating the training needs a Dynamics 365 Guide license, which is just the license part of the Office 365 tenant. You can actually look it up there. And if you want to do an analytics, for example, you want to see if how the person is performing, you actually need an additional Power BI license, of course. And it is also possible to connect to Dynamics Field Services. A field service is a way of, for example, to do work orders. So if you have work orders which you put to an engineer, you can actually make it so that if he does the training, he can then close down his work order and can also monitor the progress of his work orders in Dynamics 365. So if you look at guides, if you look at training, the old way was always overwhelming. There were at least a few days you need to understand, you got a manual, and it was really difficult. And especially if you're in a company or has a lot of people going in and going out, it costs a lot of time of experts to train the engineers or to train the personnel. So what if you do with guides? So what guides allows you to do is create a training. And you do that in an application. I'm going to show that in a few minutes. And you actually create simple step-by-step instructions. Then if you have created the training, you actually prepare the training. You go as an author, you go into, you set up the HoloLens, you go into set up the training. And that allows you to actually put all the elements on the actual device or on a virtual device, depending on how you want to build the training. Now, then you have to assign the task to an employee. And then the employee can actually use a HoloLens with the same application as an operator and then execute that training around the actual device. And the results are put into the logs, which can be checked with Power BI, and then you can together see if you can actually improve efficiency. So where was it more difficult to actually execute a task and what can be improved? So that will actually help the operator as the author. So there are different approaches. I already said it. You have actual objects, as you see on the left, real life assets, like an engine. But in my case, it's really difficult to have that in a living room. So I will be using a virtual asset. And a virtual asset means I have an actual asset. I have a digital asset, which I will put into my training, and I will do steps around that virtual asset. The difference is that with real life assets, the employee is actually performing the steps on the actual engine in this case. In a virtual asset, you can't execute the state. So virtual assets are mostly interesting to be used, let's say, in a training or, for example, on school, so that students can actually learn already before they start working at companies. So to create a training, there is one thing which is important. Building a training in guides is not that difficult, but it's important that you gather a number of information before you start actually building a training. And as soon as you have all that information, and that will take some time, then your training is actually not that difficult to build. And you can actually build, if you have everything, the stuff, all the assets, you can actually build it in a few hours. But before doing that, you need to get as much content as possible to create your guide. You also need to understand the space where you're going to execute the training. So if you do a Reels asset, you need to understand the room around the engine. So where are the spare parts laying around, and where do I have to redirect the operator to actually execute the training and to do the different tasks. It's always important to involve an actual expert, one who is always doing that job already, because he can help you and tell you where the small things are which you will actually miss if you build a training without the knowledge of doing the actual work. And another thing is understand what the objective is of the training. So make it clear to the operator. An objective doesn't mean doing 20 tasks in once, but do task after task after task. And some of these you don't have to do otherwise. Some are more difficult than others. And also be aware of the role who's actually doing the training. So make sure that they understand what you're saying in the different steps and what the instructions are, because that really depends on the role of the person. So I have a number of slides which are going really quickly through because I'm going to show this live. So first of you have to define an anchor. An anchor means where you connect to it. So if you do it on an actual device, you use something like a QR code, but we're going to do a holographic thing, which I just play in the room. Now, the structure of guides is actually easy. It consists of tasks, which are also called outlines, and each task has a logical sequence with steps. And each step can be added with all kinds of different content. Content can be 3D parts, toolkits, images, video, but also actions, like embedding a website or launching a Power App. Now, to give you an idea of this, because slides are not always the best way to explain this. So what we have here is the Dynamics application. So I'm now actually the author, not on the HoloLens yet, and I'm going to configure my stuff. So I have, for example, now let's say I will take out a playground. You will notice that I already created an anchor. So my anchor is actually a holographic anchor, which I can place somewhere in the room. And that is my starting point of my training. So then I have two tasks. One is investigate the engine. The second one is installing parts of the engine. Now, there are a lot of rules to actually build good guides. There are really best practices for that. So I'm not going through all of those things. But for example, one of them is start explaining what you're going to do. So in this case, the first step says today you will be following a training for maintenance. And then if you go to the next step, I'm going to start using things which I'm going to display. Now, in my case, I'm using a virtual asset, which is the engine. And I've imported it here in my 3D parts. And actually, I'm able to drag it in there and do things. As soon as I drag it into here, it's also updated on the HoloLens directly. So if you're working together with someone building a training, you can actually see the differences, what you're adding or removing. So let's go for this case to, let me see the playgrounds, because I can change that one. So let's say we want, for example, to add an additional part. I can actually say I want to put the supporter here. And this means that the supporter will be available in that step. But I'm also possible to change this to an image or a video. Like in this case, I have images of the video. I also have a video, and I don't have video. I have images of the engine. And I can change that too, or can remove it. Another thing which is a really interesting one is that you're able to do actions. And one of the actions is doing a website link by dragging it in there. And as soon as it's dragged in there, you can add a link which shows a web page, for example. The other one is actually using Power Apps, and I will come back to that later because I need to explain a little bit of those things. But Power Apps actually makes guides even more intelligent than it already is. So in this case, this is my actual playground as an author to build my tasks and different steps I'm executing. So you will notice that the engine is every time in the scene because that's my virtual asset. And at some point, I'm adding stuff which I do there. Now, when I created So I've now created the training. The next step would be set up the training actually in 3D space. So there are a number of things I have. I have a gesture frames which allows me to move around. I can use the hand ray, which I showed in the demo, and the gaze actually interact with all the objects I have and place them on the right position. I'm going to show that in a minute. So I'm able to pick objects, to select them, to move them, to actually do a far away select and move. I'm able to rotate objects, to make them bigger, larger, and which actually cool is, Microsoft delivers a number of styles which allows you, for example, to create, an X-ray of the object you're showing at the moment, something which I already built in, which I will showing a little bit later. So as you can see here, you have the original, so I can actually change styles. And that works actually on every hologram you put in there. So even if you don't have the holograms present, you can download them from the internet, it still will work. So that works incredibly cool. So another thing is the tether. The tether is actually a line coming from the step to the actual place where you're gonna work. It's not supposed to be every time there. When you switch to another part of the engine, it's mostly important to change the tether or not. The tether is actually the guideline to explain where on the actual asset or on the virtual asset you need to be. So I'm going to show this in a demo. I'm going back to this environment. Going to make it a little bit bigger. So let's do this. Let's turn off the volume. I don't have to do that. So let's first start with starting up guides. And asking to my host, please give a shout if it's not transmitting anymore. There is some lag in there. Not sure why it was not starting up, so let's try again. Yeah, that's better. I got a logo, always good. So the first thing I have to do is sign in. You guys will see a little bit in lag, so don't worry about that. I'm seeing actually it without lag, but this was the only way to actually stream it to streams to you, to a live session. So we'll be selecting the guides. Yeah. And now I can actually select the guide which I built, and I will be an author, which means I'm able to alter things. So I will move it to the room for now, so you can actually see this. So I'll put somewhere in the room I want to start there. And at that point, I have my first step. Now my first step doesn't have anything there. This would go exactly to the second step. My second step takes a little bit because my model, which I'm using over all the steps, is a really big, large model. It is allowed, but need to keep it small. So in this case, now you see my engine. And I'm actually having, as you see, I have that additional object, which I can actually create. So I can actually pull that here. I can pick it up. I can change it, rotate it, can make it even smaller, larger. And I can actually change styles. So let's say this should be like a warning, for example, and I can put it on the actual object. So I want to point out something like this here. But I'm also possible to change, for example, this one and actually change its position. So it makes it easy to make it on another location. You can also rotate the object. But on the other hand, as a person, I can also walk around it. So what even cool is that I can actually make it really large. So this is actually a small version of the engine.
Here's some information about Wolverhampton. Wolverhampton is a city in central England.
Sorry about that. And now we actually have a large engine into my room, which is actually very cool. And in this way, I can actually change a lot of the things as an author and playing around to get it to work. So let's say we want to rotate it a little bit. And we have now a really large engine above my couch. So these are the things which allows me to do as an author. Let me close this down for now. Okay. So let's get back to assignment. So another thing which is important, you need to assign guides. Now, in fact, guides assigning is more like giving roles and rights to a person. For now, it's not that incredibly expecting the way of how you think it should, but it's let me show it. So what we need to do is you need to go into, in this case, into the Power Platform Administrator to your guides, which is part of Power Apps and part of Dynamics. And I'm actually able to open, for example, settings. So within settings, I can actually go to users and then say that, for example, let's say that Diana Prescott should also be able to do the training. This will take a little bit of time. I can actually now say to her, always funny if I can't find it anymore. So where is my thing? I should have something which says it has rights, and for some reason I'm not finding it anymore now, which is too bad. Reassign records is not. I don't know. For some reason I'm not able to change. Okay, it's what it actually should have. It should have a screen like this, and to understand it, you have actually two roles which are important. One is the Dynamics 365 Guides author, and the other one is 365 Guides operator. The author is the one who actually can create and rename and activate and deactivate guides, and is also able to operate the guide. But the operator can only view a guide which is activated and made available to the assigned operators. So hands-on learning. So as an author now, you have created a training in the Windows application, and then you went into the HoloLens and actually created the whole scenery around the real asset, or around, in my case, the virtual asset. The next step you want to do is actually let a person, an engineer, execute the training or do the operation. So that's hands-on learning by the operator. So what the person is going to do is he's going to select one of the available guides. He's looking at the printed anchor, if there was an anchor. In my case, it's an holographic anchor, but normally he would look at the anchor which is positioned, for example, on that engine. And then he goes through step by step and get explained what he needs to do. Now, with a real asset, he would actually do the movement and things he needs to do to actually execute the task successfully. So, for example, screwing a specific part on the device and then attaching it with bolts. With a virtual asset like me, I can only step through to the steps of a task, and it will explain what needs to be done, but you can't actually do it because it's virtually. So that part I'm going to show you now also. So we're going back to the HoloLens again. Okay, so we are still there. Now let me share that screen. Otherwise, you're not going to see anything. Yes, perfect. So again, to the host, if I lose my image, just let me know, and I will actually turn off the sound again. So in my case, I go, for example, to the turbine engine demo. I will be now an operator. And it will ask me to position, because it's a virtual one. It will ask me to position the location. So I have to see, I have to change the location for that part. For some reason I put it here. So let me take it there. Yes. Sorry for that. I have a large living room. So I'll put it there. And let's start with the training. And as you notice, it now doesn't have anymore all the controls I had as an author. So I read this. So I'm going to do a training maintenance. I go to the next step. And that will tell me, okay, there's an engine. Put that here, makes it easy. So I see an engine in here. Okay, that looks good. And it says we are going to start replacing parts of the turbine engine. You want to understand how the engine works. So I've made a picture which you can look at. And there's actually a website link I can open. And it will open in front of me. And in my case, I redirected to a Wikipedia page, which shows me things I can learn more about this. So let me close that part. So if I go to the next step, it will be, for example, to see the temperature. So I explain here that this part of the engine is very hot, while the other part is still cold. Next step is we need to check, and now you see that I made a X-ray of the device, and we need to check the rotor blades of the engine with our hands to feel if all the blades are good. And I put a large one there to explain it more. And then the next step is we'll take the turbine serve view. And that's something I will get back to you later when we do the power. So adding power apps, because that's a cool thing actually to do with guides. So what they have done is they have made it possible to use power apps in guides. But you have to understand it's loosely coupled. And what it means is I'm able to add per step a link to a power app, and that's it. I don't have the information from the step itself. So you have to think smart about how you build your power app around, or the thing you want to do with the power app around the step you're actually performing, or the steps. Now, it is easy actually to create a power app and then make it so that it goes to a specific page with a question within the same power app based on the step. And because you add the link per step, you also know on which step you are. So it's actually a way of finding solutions for that. But keep in mind, the team is expanding and expanding the technology every month. So I wouldn't be surprised that at some point I'm able to have information for my step into the power app. So that part I'm going to show too. So what I first have been doing is I created a power app just like you do normally, a power app within powerapps.com. And in my case, I created a nice turbine engine work survey, which lasts 5 minutes. To give you an idea of how it was built, it's actually based on a standard template, because it's purely as an example showing what you can actually do. So that's loading. In this case, I created a number of steps, number of questions. So like the first one, which turbine engine have you checked? What did you notice during the check? And all kind of stuff. How long did you do the test, etc. So what I then did do is I published the Power App, and the Power App URL was placed, and I will show you that part. I have to go back to my home. Let's go to the actual engine. My step is we would like to take you an engine. I've put here a Power App in there with a link. So in this case, this is my published Power App link. It is important that the person who is accessing the Power App also has rights to access it. So you have to keep that in mind. But that's it. You don't have to do anything more. So you can understand you can do per step another URL, and at that point you can actually make your connection between Power Apps and between your environment. So to give you an example of how that looks, because we were still in that step, let me start it up again. So the step where I was left was step 5 of 6, and it says, would you like to take a turbine engine survey? So I click on the link. Hopefully that will work. So I now have my turbine engine work survey, and I can just literally click with my hand to get started. Problem is my living room is a little bit dark, so that makes it easy, it makes it somewhat difficult, some case to identify my hands. So what turbine engine is checked? Now I know the turbine engine is, for example, a turbine engine TE87, one I made up. We had checked paints, we had a distorted blade. No, it took me not much time. Say it took me 4 hours. The demo was actually short to do the blades need further investigation. Yes, they do. Other press other comments? No, I don't have other comments. So done. And thank you for attending the turbine engine workflow. Now, in this case, the information stored is in Excel, but I can also put it, because it's Power Apps, to a database or some other data location. So I can actually continue the step here, and that's it. What will be interesting is because we made another training with this one, and this actually explains the different steps you can take. So, for example, this explains, for example, we need to create a separator here, so we need to use wrenches, and it explains where you have to put it there. The other one is, well, finally you install the air vaults. The air vaults are these round things, and you need to twist it with your hand. So you have a number of assets which allows you to indicate what the person has to do. In this case, my assets are not animating, but it is possible to use animated assets, which allows you actually to show the person the exact move, the exact thing he needs to do in that step. Now, you will finish the step, and at some point, he has finished the guide. So let me get back. So if you have workers, engineers, executing your training several times, you actually want to know if you can improve efficiency. And it's not like a watch thing of looking at how your engineers are doing. It's actually a way of helping them further to see which of the part of the training was more difficult than other parts. And that can actually result in changing the training, or maybe using other terms, or maybe define more steps within a task, or split up a task in different tasks to make it more easy. Now, to do this, to actually get insights about how the training has been done, we have something called Dynamic 365 Guides Analytics. And it gives you detailed statistics and information through Power BI reports, like metrics, process optimization, and all sorts of things. So the data which is collected are things like the gaze, the fact that I'm touching something, and that I'm going to the next step in my task. So the time I take to execute a step within a task, but also the time it takes to do the entire task is recorded. Now, what are the questions you can actually get off this information is, for example, how is the usage done, and is it changing on a daily basis? Which guides are most frequently used? Because you can imagine if you have a company who has hundreds of guides, they want to know if some guides are just skipped because the job is too easy to perform, or people find it too difficult to actually execute it. But also how long take the guides to run. And you can actually provide it or share the report if you have Power BI licenses. So in this case, there are two reports available. One is process time tracking, the other is guides. Guide usage. I'm going to show that in a minute. And what you need to do is, I've said it here, but I'm going to show that. So the things you have to do is actually very simple. If you have your environment like this, you can go to Analyze, and there is an instance URL describing your instance of your guides. So you can copy that one, and then you can actually click on a specific guide analytics template, which starts a Power BI desktop. And hopefully that will not take too much time. So it now starts a Power BI, and it asks me to enter the instance URL. So I'll be doing that. I load the instance, and it actually gets all the guides, the source events, all the events that has taken place. Now, in my case, this is a demo which I have been doing 1 or 2 times. So it doesn't have that much information there. It actually doesn't have a lot of information, almost nothing. So if there's a daily guide usage, it's not there because it's not running anything. So to actually show you guys this, I have another environment showing, let me see where I have that. There's this one. That's sorry for that. That's the demo. Oh, come on. That was not what I wanted. Sorry for that. Okay, yeah. So to give you an idea of how it actually can look like if you have a lot of things running. You see that now, for example, how long is the guide running in minutes? What's the average of running time? What's the max of runtime? What's the minimum of runtime? But you also see, for example, how long did every task take? And you can compare if some people doing better or others. You have the ability to filter and define anything. In this case, this demo includes 10 users. There were 26 runs and 6 devices were used. The usage demo, the usage screen, shows me how many times the guide was used during the day. So on this particular day, it was run 8 times. And I'm able to see which guides were run on that 8 times. So there was one of, I think 2 of this one of this. So 2, 1, 1, 1, 2. And you can actually see the average runtime per guide. So it gives you some information as an author, which you can help to improve your training. So let's get back to this. Yeah, and what an interesting thing is to show, I'm not going to the slides for that part, is that you're also able, you have to understand Guides works under Dynamics. So what it actually uses, Dynamics runs on CDS, the Common Data Service, and that's the same for Guides. So if I have, for example, my environments. Let me take this one, for example. I need to be in environments. Then I can, for example, open my environment. What I actually get is the contents of all my guides. So I have here the common data service with all the 3D objects. I have the images, which are in the database. I have the videos. This is actually the telemetry data, which is stored to actually do the insights. So the cool thing about this is, and you can imagine it already, that accessing CDS, for example, from Powerups, from a Canvas app, or even from your custom application, is rather easy. And it actually allows you to reuse the information which is stored in the CDS. So you could build additional applications on top of the guides itself, but also use information from that in another perspective. And an example can be that I had a customer, for example, who wanted to bind the model and also the way of how everything was configured in an environment to be used as a platform for a digital twin and then provide additional information from IoT data. And by accessing the CDS, we're able to do that. So this is an actually really powerful environment, which can be used if you're using guides. And of course, CDS is an entity system, which allows you to actually extend the entities with additional data and enrich it in that case. So it gives you a lot of opportunities. That was also the part I wanted to explain about the customizable options. So let's wrap up the session. So if you talk about guides, it's actually it is the next big step if you talk about immersive training. It's a great tool to build training and guidance for different industries. It's no code interface, so look at it is that the author does have to be a power user and need to know a little bit about it, but most of the things can be done very easily. It's really quickly to understand. Within 1 or 2 days, somebody is really up and running and can actually create their own guides already. But keep in mind, it's important before starting creating a guide to actually understand what is required. What's your space in which you're going to build a guide? What's the role for who is it supposed to be? Now, Microsoft HoloLens 2, of course, gives the ability to supply hands-free training on site using guides. At the moment, guides is only on HoloLens 1 and 2. With HoloLens 2, actually, the interactions, as you saw with the natural gestures. And what's really cool is that the team is really great. I talked a lot with the team of the Microsoft team for guides, and they're very open to hear additional ideas. So you can post them to them. And what's cool is that they actually release every week new additional information, new additional functionality, performance upgrades, but also new functionality into guides. So the product, which is actually released last year, somewhere in September, is increasingly growing and growing. And for my opinion, it will make absolutely the tool to create trainings for different industries. Now, last thing but not least is also an important one. There is customization possible through the CDS. Make sure you're not breaking upcoming functionality by changing stuff, but you're able to use the data or to extend it with your own data and build your own applications around it. And to give you an understanding, think about, for example, create a Canvas app which accesses the CDS and is shown in one step of the guide, of a task of a guide. So you can understand 1 + 1 is 2, but it can actually what you can actually build with those stuff. So hopefully you have learned something about how to create immersive guides with HoloLens 2 and Microsoft Guides. And thank you for listening and have a great conference. So thank you.
Thank you, Alex, for that wonderful session. We have 3 questions and we have a couple of minutes left, so I will try to read them to you.
Okay.
The first one is, we are still on old AX, not 365. Is it possible to just purchase the 365 Guides module standalone? So I guess on-premise question.
Yeah, no, that's I think not yet possible. The Guides licenses are part of the Office 365 tenant, and they have to be actually purchased through the licensing of the tenant itself. So if you go into the tenant, that's the place where you actually get it. So it's not able to use it on an on-prem case.
Gotcha. Second question that was around when you watched or you presented your living room with the engine. The question is, would someone watching the training see the living room behind the engine, or are they watching it in HoloLens too? And would they see their own location behind the engine? So I think it's a question like a mixed reality or virtual reality, or how does this feel?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It is mixed reality, meaning I saw and you guys also saw my living room, because I'm actually in my living room. Meaning, if you look at the lady now on the screen, she's working on the engine. She's actually seeing the factory where she is standing in. And this is a really important part, because you have to understand, for example, if you look at her situation, she has to get parts which she has to place somewhere in the engine. Those parts are stored in, for example, in boxes, which are in the back. And you're actually able to navigate someone within a guide to that place, and then pick it out of the box and then use it on the engine. In my case, I was using a virtual asset, which is a real thing, for demonstration purposes, because I just don't have an actual airplane engine in my room. Of course,
you don't?
I would like to, but I don't have that. So that's, but it's virtual assets are really interesting if you want, for example, to create the same training guide, for example, for students on a school which don't have yet the environment as the engineer has. So it is really extending. You can do a lot. Let me put it that way. So it's mixed reality. You will see your environment around you. That's the important part.
Cool. And the last question, can you create guides that can be watched on a computer rather than on a HoloLens only? So like using this also, the guides also on a normal PC?
It's supposed to be used on a HoloLens, but you could, because I actually did the same, you could also record it. So you could create a recording and then show it, for example, in a video on a website or in part of the internet, and give that to engineers beforehand they actually start using the HoloLens. So you can actually record your whole